Hey everyone, I'm Liz Ferry and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I made this heart-patterned knit hat. Some things you'll need for this project are a pair of size 5mm circular knitting needles that are 18 inches long, a pair of size 8mm circular knitting needles that are 18 inches long, a pair of scissors, a stitch marker, and a tapestry needle. The yarns I used were this black bulky weight yarn from Lion brand Thick and Quick for the background color, and for the hearts I used 4 strands of worsted weight yarns in different shades of red to make up a bulky weight yarn when held together. I used 2 strands of cherry red, 1 strand of burgundy, both from Red Heart Super Saver, and I used 1 strand of red from Caron Simply Soft. If you like, you could just use any bulky weight yarn for the hearts. To make the liner for this hat, I used Loops and Threads Country Loom in Rich Granite, which is another bulky weight yarn. And to attach the 2 layers together, I used a size 8mm crochet hook and more of the same skein of Thick and Quick black yarn. To make the pom-pom at the top of the hat, I used some black yarn from Red Heart Super Saver and more of my red yarns that I used as the hearts color. I used a piece of 4x5 cardboard with a 1/4 inch by 2 3/4 inch slot cut out of one of the 4-inch sides as a pom-pom maker. And I used a sharp tapestry needle to sew on the pom-pom. And the pattern for this project will be available in my Ravelry store at the link in the description below. First, I'm going to use a long tail cast on. I'm beginning my row by casting on 56 plus 1 stitches. If you want to make a different size, you can cast on more or less stitches. Just make sure that your stitch count is divisible by 4 plus 1. I'm adding an extra stitch to the first row of casting on because I'm going to slip that stitch off once I finish casting on so that I can have a more invisible join on my first row. Okay, so I've cast on my 57 stitches. Now I'm just going to make sure that none of them are twisted so that I can begin to work in the round. So the first thing I'm going to do is slip the first stitch that I made onto my right needle knitwise. So I'm going to insert the needle as though making a knit stitch and slip that off of the left needle onto the right. Now I'm going to slip the last stitch that I made, so this stitch right here, off of my right needle and over the first stitch that I just slipped, as though I'm casting off the stitch. So I'm going to grab that stitch, pull it over that first stitch that I just slipped onto my right needle, and I'm going to slip it off over the first stitch, just like I'm casting off. And then I'm going to tighten that stitch by pulling on the 2 tails. And that's going to give me a more continuous look. Now I'm going to treat this first stitch that I slipped as the last stitch of the row. So now I'm going to place a stitch marker onto my needle to mark that as the beginning and end of the row. Now I'm going to make a couple of rows of ribbing. So you can do the ribbing in whatever way you like. My preferred method of doing ribbing is to do 2 knits and 2 purls all the way around the row. That's one reason why I want my stitches to be divisible by 4. So I'm just going to go ahead and knit 2 and purl 2 all the way around the row. And I'm going to repeat that pattern for 4 rows so that I have 4 rows of ribbing. If you like, you could do more or less rows of ribbing. I just want to do 4 rows so that I can have a solid foundation of ribbing, but still have plenty of space for my hearts pattern to shine through. And when I finish with my ribbing, I'm going to switch over to my 8mm needles and knit for 1 row. Okay, now I've finished with my 4 rows of knit 2, purl 2, and I've finished with my ribbing. So now I'm going to switch to my 8mm needles by doing a row of knits around the whole row. And to make sure that the stitch marker doesn't come off, I'm just going to stick the other needle into the bottom of the rows, and I'll just continue with my row of knits. So now I've finished with my row of knitting all the stitches and transferring over to my 8mm needle. So now I'm going to pull the needle out from the rows below so that I can move the stitch marker to the other needle. Now in this row, I'm going to begin my hearts pattern. To do the hearts pattern, I'm going to knit into the first 3 stitches using my background color. Then I'm going to add my hearts color and knit 1 stitch using the hearts color, and I'm going to do that around the entire row. So first, I'll knit into the first 3 stitches. And now I'm going to add my hearts color. I'm just going to loosely tie the hearts color onto the background color yarn. I'm planning on lining this hat so that all of the trailing ends aren't going to be visible. So I'm just going to tie that down and move it to the bottom. Then I'm going to pick up the yarn underneath the background color yarn. And I'm going to knit 1 stitch using my hearts color. And now I want to make sure that this is a little loose at the back so that I can still stretch the fabric without warping the stitch. So now I'm going to pick up the background color underneath the hearts color and knit 3 stitches. Now I'm once again going to pick up the hearts color underneath the background color. And as you can see, these yarns are starting to twist around each other. First I'm going to knit 1 stitch using the hearts color, and I want to make sure to keep this really loose so that I can still stretch out the fabric without warping the shapes of the stitches. So I'm going to pull these apart so that I can make sure I have enough excess at the back. Then I'm going to pick up the background color underneath the hearts color and knit 3 stitches using the background color. Then once again, I'm going to pull up the hearts color underneath the background color. And I'm going to make sure that I have plenty of excess at the back. And I'm going to knit 1 stitch using the background color. Then once again, I'm going to stretch that out just to make sure that I have plenty of excess at the back so that I can stretch the fabric fully without warping any of the stitches. And now once again, I'm going to pick up the background color underneath the hearts color and knit 3 stitches. Now as you can see at this point, I've twisted the yarns around each other a lot, so I'm actually going to untwist these yarns. And then once I've got them fully untwisted, I'm going to actually continue and twist them around each other in the same direction as I've been untwisting, so that as I work, I'll be untwisting the yarns, and I'm just going to do this every once in a while so that I can make sure that the yarns don't twist around each other too much. Now I'm going to continue by picking up the heart color yarn underneath the background color. I'm going to continue to stretch out the fabric just to make sure that everything is loose at the back. One way that I like to make sure that I am keeping my red stitches loose is by placing my finger underneath the yarn as I'm pulling it up. Then I'll pick up the background color underneath the heart's color and knit 3 stitches. And I'm going to continue in that pattern all the way around the row. Okay, so I finished my first row of color changes, and here is what I have so far. As you can see, I have a lot of loops on the inside because I knitted those red stitches so loosely, and that's going to allow the fabric to stretch without warping the stitches. In the next row, I'm going to drop the red yarn and work only with the black yarn. So I'm going to pull up the background color of yarn underneath the heart color. And now I'm going to knit into the first 3 stitches, and then into each of the red stitches I'm going to knit through the back loop. That's going to twist the stitch into a heart shape. So first I'm going to knit into the first 3 stitches of the row, and now into the first red stitch. Instead of knitting normally this way, I'm going to instead turn the stitch to the back. I'm going to insert my needle in through the back of the stitch. Then I'm going to wrap my yarn and knit around the back loop of the stitch. And that's going to twist the stitch into this little heart shape. And if you look closely at the stitches, if I stretch out the fabric, you can see that the stitch at the bottom will separate and open up, and that doesn't really lend to our heart shape. But if I were to stretch out the fabric of this, because it's twisted, it won't open up at the bottom, so it'll keep that heart shape. So I'm going to keep on going, knitting normally into the 3 black stitches, and then knitting through the back loop into each of the red stitches. So now at the red stitch, I'm going to turn to the back, insert my needle into the stitch from the back, wrap the yarn around the needle, and pull through to knit through the back loop. And now as you can see, if I stretch out the material, that stitch stays nice and twisted at the bottom. So I'm going to continue that pattern through the whole row. I'm going to knit normally into the 3 black stitches, and then into the red stitch, I'm going to knit through the back loop. Alright, I finished my row of knitting all of the red stitches through the back loop, and now we have all of these heart shapes. So now I'm just going to knit into every stitch normally for 1 row, and then I'm going to do another row of hearts offset from the first row. So I'm just going to knit into every stitch for 1 row. Okay, so now I finished with 1 sequence of my heart stitch pattern. Now I'm going to do the next one, where I'm going to offset the hearts and put them in between the 2 hearts of the previous section. So when I did the first section, I placed the heart on the 4th stitch of the row, So to make sure that it is in between the two hearts that I made in the last rows, I'm going to place my first heart on the second stitch of the row, then every fourth stitch after that. So I'm going to knit into the first stitch, then I'm going to pick my heart color back up, again underneath the background color yarn, and keeping it loose by putting my finger underneath the yarn as I work. And then I'm going to knit one stitch using the red, and then change colors back to the black underneath the heart color yarn. Then I'm going to knit 3 stitches using the black. Then I'll change colors back to the red, again keeping everything loose by holding it with my finger, bringing it underneath the background color yarn. I'm going to knit 1 stitch using the red, making sure that I have these nice big loose loops at the back. Then change colors back to the black and knit 3 using black. And once again, I'm going to untwist the yarn and then continue to twist it in the same direction so that I'm untwisting as I work. Okay, I finished with my second row of color change stitches. Now I'm going to do the same thing that I did after my first row of color change stitches. I'm going to work a normal knit stitch into each black stitch, and I'm going to knit into the back loop for each red stitch. I'm going to knit normally into the black stitch, then into the back loop for the red stitch. Then once again, knit normally into the next 3 black stitches, and then into the next red stitch, knit into the back loop. And now I'm going to continue that pattern around the entire row. And now you can really start seeing the pattern take shape. Okay, now I finished with my row of knitting the red stitches through the back loop. Now I'm going to do another row of just plain knit in every stitch of the row. And I'm going to repeat this pattern until the hat reaches the length that I want before I start to decrease. So in the next row, I'm just going to repeat that first row that I did, where I made a red stitch every 4th stitch of the row. Then another row of knitting in the back loop for every red stitch, then a row of regular knits. Then I'll do another row offsetting the hearts by knitting a red stitch in the 2nd stitch of the row, then every 4th stitch after that. Then once again, I'll work a row of knitting every red stitch through the back loop, and then 1 more row of regular knit stitches. And I'm going to repeat that pattern until the hat reaches the length that I want. Okay, I finished lengthening the hat. I ended up doing 2 more rows of hearts, and I ended my work 1 row after the hearts on the row where I worked into the back loop for every red stitch. Now I'm going to begin to decrease the hat. So to do that, I'm going to start by doing a row of knits using my black yarn, and I'm going to decrease every 3rd and 4th stitch together. So I'm going to knit 2 normally, and then knit the 3rd and 4th stitch together. So first I'll knit the first 2 stitches, and now the 3rd and 4th stitch, I'm just going to knit both of those together. And I'm going to do that for every 3rd and 4th stitch of the row. So now my work will be divisible by 3 instead of by 4. That means that when I do my next heart row, instead of placing the heart on the 4th stitch, I'll be placing the heart on the 3rd stitch. So I'm just going to keep repeating that pattern all the way around the row. Okay, so I finished my first row of decrease. Now I'm going to do another row of hearts. This time I'm going to place the heart every 3rd stitch of the row. And I'm just going to do this in exactly the same way that I've done my previous rows of hearts, except this time I'm just going to do every 3rd stitch, since I decreased the 4th stitch in the last row. Next, I'm going to do my row of knits using my background color with every red stitch worked into the back loop. And then I'm going to decrease for one more row. This time I'm going to knit one and then decrease the 2nd and 3rd stitch together. That means my work will now be divisible by 2 instead of by 3. Okay, I've finished with my next row of decrease. Now my row is divisible by 2. Now instead of placing a heart stitch every 3rd stitch, I'm going to place every 2nd stitch. And I'm going to start the row with a heart stitch so that I can offset the hearts from the previous row of hearts. So my first stitch is going to be a heart. Then my next stitch is the background color. So I'm just going to go back and forth around the whole row, with every 2nd stitch being a heart stitch. Alright, I finished my next row of heart stitches. Next I'm going to do another row of knit stitches using the background color, knitting every red stitch through the back loop. Alright, I finished my next row of knitting every heart stitch through the back loop. Now I'm going to do one more row of decrease. In this row, I'm going to knit every 1st and 2nd stitch of the row together. So I'm basically doing a decrease for every stitch of the row. In the end, I'm going to have 14 stitches left in the row, and at that point I'm just going to end the work and gather the top together to close. Alright, so I finished with my last row of decrease. Now I'm going to gather the top closed. So to do that, I'm going to cut off a long tail of my yarn. Then I'm going to thread my yarn tail onto a tapestry needle. And I'm going to place all of my stitches onto the tapestry needle so that I can gather the top closed. Now before I gather that closed, I'm going to cut off a tail of my red yarn as well, and I'm going to put it to the inside. Then I'm just going to pull on the tail until the top gathers closed. Now I'm just going to sew through the top a couple more times to tighten that. So I'm going to put the tail through all of those stitches again and pull to tighten. Then I'm just going to sew through a few more times to fasten the yarn in place. And then I'll just cut off my yarn. Okay, now I've finished with the main hat. Now I'm going to turn it inside out and find the tail end of the red yarn. Now I could sew this tail down to fasten it, but since I'm going to be lining it, I'm just going to loop the yarn a couple of times around some of the trailing ends inside, and then tie it down. Since I'm going to be lining it, all of this is going to be covered up, so I'm just going to leave it like that. And I'm also going to find the other tail end and do the same thing. I actually untied this from where I first tied it to fasten it in, so I'm going to loop the yarn around one of the trailing ends a couple of times, and then I'm just going to tie it down. I'm doing it like this because sewing it in will sometimes pull and warp at the color. So now I'm just going to line this hat. I've already made another hat of the same size with the same amount of stitches using the same needles, so it will fit right inside the first hat. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn this hat inside out so that the purl sides are on the outside and the knit sides are on the inside. Although if you prefer, you can also leave the purls on the outside. I kind of like how this looks too. It sort of has like a Sherpa-like look if you do that with this type of yarn, but I'm just going to use the knit side. So next I'm going to put the liner hat inside of the main hat. And that's what it's going to look like on the inside. So that's going to cover up all of those trailing ends and have a nice homespun texture on the inside. Next, I'm going to use the tail of the main hat at the bottom where I first started, and I'm going to use that to just do a crochet trim around the edge of both hats into each stitch to attach them together. First, I'm going to put my hook through in the same place where the tail is, and I'm going to pull it to the inside, but I'm going to leave a loop on the outside. So I'm just going to pull the end of the tail to the inside. Then I'm going to insert my hook into that loop that I just made. Now I'm going to insert my hook into the next stitch, and then into the first stitch of the hat on the inside as well. Then I'm going to pull a loop up through both, then pull that loop through the loop on my hook, making a slip stitch. Now I'm going to just continue to do that into each stitch. And the reason why I'm doing it like this is because crochet is a very stretchy stitch, whereas if I were to sew these both together, I would need to use some sort of zigzag stitch or something like that to make sure that the hat maintained the stretch at the bottom edge. So I'm just going to crochet these together to make it a little bit simpler. And then that will leave this slip stitch edge along the bottom of the hat, which I think looks kind of nice. Once I run out of the tail, I'm just going to switch to a new scrap of the black yarn. And I can either sew in these ends, or I can continue to work my slip stitches on top of the yarn to tie it in. So I'm just going to pull the tails over so that when I make my next stitch, it will grab and tie in those tails. Then for the next stitch, I'm going to do the opposite and swing them out so that when I work the next stitch, it will tie those tails in. And I'm just going to keep on alternating between those two. For the next stitch, I'll swing it forward and loop the yarn over, tying those tails in. Then for the next stitch, I'll swing the tails out and bring the yarn over and tie the tails in. And as I go, that's just going to secure the ends of these two yarns. So I'm just going to do a row of slip stitches all the way around the edge. Okay, so I've done a slip stitch into every stitch all the way around. Now I'm going to cut off a long tail of my yarn, pull that tail through, and then I'm going to find that first slip stitch that I made. I'm going to bring the tail under that stitch. Then I'm going to bring the tail through the last stitch that I made. And now I'll just pull that tail to the inside. And then I'll use my tapestry needle to sew that tail down to one of the ribs on the inside. Then I'm going to cut off the tail. And now the hat is complete. And if you like, you can leave it like this, but I'm going to make a giant pom-pom to sew to the top of the hat using matching colors. Next, I'm going to make a pom-pom out of the rest of my red yarn, and I'm also going to add some black yarn that matches the color that I used for the background of the hat. I could use the same yarn that I used for the background of the hat, but since that yarn is a bulky yarn, I'm just going to use a matching color in a thinner weight. To make my pom-pom, I'm going to wrap my yarn around this cardboard piece that I cut with a little slot cut out of it so that I can more easily tie around the pom-pom. So first I'm going to wrap the rest of my red yarn around a few times, then I'm going to add in some of my black yarn. I'm going to wrap the black yarn around a bunch of times since I used 4 strands at once of the red yarn to make them more or less equal. Now I'm going to wrap a scrap of the same black yarn around all of my yarn that I've put around the pom-pom maker so far, and I'm going to tie it tightly on this side. Then I'm going to put the yarn through to the other side and tie it tightly on that side as well. This is going to make all of the yarn at the center of the pom-pom a little bit more secure, because I'm going to be making an extra large pom-pom and I want to make sure that it's really strongly tied together. So now I'm going to continue wrapping my yarn around the pom-pom maker to make the pom-pom even more full. Okay, now I'm going to take another scrap piece of yarn, and I'm going to wrap it around all of my yarn and then tie it off just like I did with the other scrap. And then I'm going to cut along the top and bottom of all the yarn that I wrapped around my cardboard. I am going to leave the tails of the yarn that I just tied extra long though, so that I can use that to sew the pom-pom to the hat later. Now that I've cut both sides, I'm just going to slip the pom-pom off of the maker. And now I'm just going to trim the pom-pom in a couple of places so that it's more evenly shaped. I'm going to hold the pom-pom by the tails of the 2 long strands so that I can make sure not to cut them. Now I just need to sew the pom-pom to the top of the hat. To sew the pom-pom down, I'm just going to take one of the tails of the two tails that I used to tie the pom-pom together, and I'm going to thread it onto a sharp tapestry needle. Then I'm going to sew the pom-pom around the hat. I'm not just going to tie the pom-pom on, because that will make it flop around a lot. So I'm just going to stitch through. Then I'm going to stitch through the whole pom-pom and come out at the top. Now I'm going to make a stitch across, come back out through the bottom of the pom-pom, and then I'm going to make another stitch going around the circle at the top of the hat. Then back through to the top of the pom-pom. And I'm just going to keep on doing that until I've sewn the pom-pom all the way around the top of the hat. Okay, now I've finished sewing the pom-pom down. Now I'm just going to secure the tail by doing a back stitch at the top of the hat. Then instead of sewing the tail down, I'm just going to pull it out and trim it to match the pom-pom. Now I'm also going to sew the other tail in. That one I'm just going to do a couple of back stitches at the top of the hat, and then I'm going to sew it through the pom-pom and trim it just like I did the other tail. And now the hat is done. I think this hat turned out so cute. I made one that's black with pink hearts, and one that's pink with black hearts too. I really like how this stitch looks, and I think it would be cute to use to make other things like a bag or even a sweater. Let me know what you think of this stitch in the comments. If you liked this video, don't forget to press the like button or share it on social media. And if you make something using this or any of my tutorials, tag me on Instagram at LizFairy to show me your work. If you'd like to help out the channel, you can donate to my Patreon at patreon.com/fairyrings, or you can leave a super thanks on the video right here on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed this project. This is my first knitting video, but if you also like crochet content, I have a ton of crochet tutorials on the channel already. Feel free to check those out. I'm very new to knitting, so I would really appreciate your feedback, or you can let me know what other types of knitting projects that I should try in the comments section. That's all I have for you today, but I'll be back with another project, probably a crochet project, really soon. So if you want to see my latest projects, you can follow me on Instagram, or subscribe to my channel here on YouTube, and click the bell to receive notifications every time I post a new video. And I'll see you all here next time. Bye!